Welcome to the Coast to Coast podcast, brought to you by PlayPicks and The Lines, coming to you from the West Coast. Josh Lander, joined by my guy Nate Weitzer on the East Coast. And we are looking at day 2 of the first round of these NBA playoffs here, the Sunday games. In round 1, we've got a bunch of Eastern Conference matchups, 1 Western Conference matchups. We'll get into all of those. In this one, we're taking a look at what I would probably call the marquee matchup of round 1 here, regardless of conference. We've got the 2-7. Brooklyn is headed to Boston, taking on the Celtics. Take a look at some of the stuff in this one with you guys. Make sure you do check out Nate's great article up on playpicks.com, as well as some best bets and player props. He's all over the place with these NBA games, as well as baseball games as well. So make sure you check him out on playpicks.com, and make sure you do like and subscribe to this page, as we'll continue to bring you each and every single playoff game, including, as we are right now, the weekend games throughout this postseason, and continue to get to those player props videos as well. So do like and subscribe so you can keep getting all that stuff here with us. And as always, if you do still need a FanDuel or a DraftKings account, head to ftpicks.com or dkpicks.com. Find those listings in your area, such as what we've got for Sunday's matchups. Nate, let's get into it.
Celtics are -4 at home. They are favored to win the series, now up to -130. I guess sharp action drove that up but you know, it's weird that the Nets at +110 are not favored to win this series, but they are still ahead of the Celtics in terms of their futures. As in, if people feel like if they get past the Celtics, they are going to continue to roll. Some interesting odds here. +164 for the Celtics to win in 6 or fewer games at FanDuel. +120 for them to win game 1 and the series. That's not great odds there. No. +550 for them to lose game 1, win the series. Which is interesting. All certainly possible. I mean, these are two bitter rivals. We'll be going back and forth. Let's look at the other 3 games on Sunday, which we will bring you a game video for each. Hawks are +6.5 at Miami after they came back to beat the Cavs Friday night. Total 217, but we don't have props up yet because Bam Adebayo is in COVID protocols and could be unavailable for that first game. Bulls +10 at the Bucks, who swept them throughout the regular season there. 229 is the total. And they're the second biggest series favorite, the Bucks, because the Suns, after opening around -1,600 to beat the Pelicans, are now -2,500, a gigantic favorite to win that series. And they're also 10-point favorites in the nightcap in that opener. Total is 225. So Celtics Nets, I'm definitely looking more towards total than I am picking a winner, because it's star ball, right? It's really Tatum versus Durant, and then kind of stars on opposite ends of the floor. Kyrie against Marcus Smart, Jaylen Brown quietly in there, a huge critical piece in terms of why I think the Celtics have an advantage long-term in the series. The Nets don't have anyone who can guard him, and Durant's going to exhaust himself guarding Tatum. I think JB is going to get a lot of time on Seth Curry if they wind up putting him on the floor. Bruce Brown, even, a little too undersized to deal with Jaylen Brown, that is. And his numbers have really spiked without Rob Williams in terms of his offensive production. The Celtics offense, they figured it out playing without him, averaging 130 points per game their last 7 without Rob. With a 136 offensive rating their last 5. Defensive rating is a human 113. And they've gone over in 7 of their last 9 at home, scoring 120. And the defensive rating 112.5 again in that span. The only unders, Josh, Miami, Dallas. We don't need to explain how good those teams are defensively. Brooklyn has the ability to slow things down in the playoffs like we saw last year, but last year's roster was a lot better defensively. Unless you're going to tell me you have a time machine and Ben Simmons has been playing for 3 weeks and knows how to play basketball again, I don't really see the Nets getting a long string of stops in the fourth quarter. It's the number 1 ISO team in the Nets versus the number 1 ISO defense. But sometimes good D, better O, as we saw in the last meeting between these teams, really the only meaningful regular season game to look at. As the previous 3, Kyrie was out. A ton of guys were out in the middle too, including Durant. Yeah. But that last meeting, 126-120, Tatum goes off for 54. Durant claps back for 37. Kyrie, 19 points on poor shooting, but it's not like Marcus Smart put the clamps on him when his individual defensive rating is 127 in that game. Kyrie can, of course, bounce back. He always loves to stick it to the Leprechauns and the crowd there in Boston. So I think the Brooklyn knows they have to outscore teams right now to win. They're pretty steadily getting to around 120. The Celtics in their 2 games on 4+ days rest, Josh, and they've been off for 7 days, of course. They went over by an average of 36 points per game, those totals. So the offense should be clicking. We should see a little more pace. And I like over 224. And if you're someone who loves to play it safe, you can go Nets +8 and get over 220. I don't see the Nets necessarily just walking off. They're going to try to steal game 1 because they have that they, the Celtics might be rusty. We don't know when Rob Williams is coming back. It could be by game 5. It could be a little earlier. Nobody knows. I think the Nets will be competitive down the stretch. They're not going to lose by more than 8. And I think we'll go over because that's how the Nets stay competitive.
Yeah, it's how the Nets stay competitive. And to be honest, I mean, the Celtics, they came back from sort of their grave at the beginning of the season where they were already cast for dead and then became, the surprise team of recent memory, like the most surprising team in terms of the middle of the season turnaround in recent memory in the NBA, to being, the second seed in the East. And they got there with defense. But my point is at the same time, they have a sort of a similar attribute that we're talking about with the Nets here, where when they play another team, especially these Eastern Conference foes, with good offenses and not the defensive style play of basically everybody besides the Raptors and the Heat. But when you start playing other teams like the Bucks and the Bulls, and even now the Celtics and Nets are 2 teams that I consider high potent offenses, high octane offenses with 2 guys that can just score at will and combine for 70 without a blink of an eye. So I think that's what you get when these 2 teams come together. And I think this 224 spread, I think it should be closer to 230 than it is to 224, to be honest with you. Or I'm sorry, the total there, obviously not the spread. And I think as a result of, I think it's lower as the result of the fact that the Nets have been going under and they've been playing teams like the Cavs and the Knicks. They went over versus the Pacers. And I think all these games against these grinded out Eastern Conference teams that they've been playing over the course of the end of to end their season over the last 3 weeks or so, that's driving this total down. And the fact that the Celtics are still known as a defensive team and they've gone under at times against bad teams because they blow them the hell out, right? And they win, 125 to 98, and they go under the total because the other team couldn't hang at all, and the total, whatever. So it ends at 222, 223, et cetera. So my point is that I think there's a pretty clear enough distinction between when these 2 teams are playing grinded out slow teams and they do go under certain totals, and when they play teams that have high octane offenses like the Nets and Celtics both do. And I'm really ignoring the defensive ratings of both teams here, just going, it's just going to be a battle of get buckets. And I think both these teams can get buckets on each other. I think the bigger problem, to your point, and the reason that the Celtics are favored by 4 is they're going to have more trouble stopping what the Celtics do than I think the Celtics have a better opportunity to stop what the Nets do. Obviously, you wish Rob Williams was there, but I mean, you touched on it briefly. Like they don't, Brooklyn doesn't score at the rim, right? They're not really scoring in the paint nearly as much as they are that 2-point mid range, which we all know. Definitely increase the amount of points that they score from 3 and the percentage of points they score from 3 when Kyrie is in there, as he is in this one. So that'll be helpful. They definitely, could use a Seth Curry that's not hurt. So TBD on if this slight rest for him, since they won their first playing game, will help him get back into form, because he looked dreadful in that game and he just looked hurt, and he's looked hurt for roughly 3 weeks or so. So we need to see how he looks. That heavily impacts him, obviously the over in this one, and also how they use him. If Steve Nash will get him involved in the offense a bit more than just the sort of catch and shoot threes that he's been doing in the corners. An interesting stat about Seth Curry, since he came to the Nets, his percentage of his points that he's scoring off of the dribble pull up has gone way down, as he's not doing that dribble handoff action with Embiid that was super, super effective for those 2 guys and the 76ers. Now he's not really doing that with anybody. Obviously the first thought would be maybe KD, but there's really no big bodies to screen for him, like there was Joel Embiid. And he's not really, he's not as effective, obviously, if he's just standing in the corner waiting for someone to pass to him, which he's not going to get past to him when KD's at the wing 15, 16 feet out, he's pulling that every time. That's a bucket, and he's going to keep pulling it. So my point is that that does impact the over. But if Seth Curry is a bit more healthy, he'll be more impactful, and he'll be calling for the ball more. He'll be demanding the ball more, and inserting himself into the offense a bit more, like a Joe Harris would if he was in. So also, Patty Mills continues to shoot poorly, but like I said, this is going to be about the stars, and love the Kyrie. I actually like the Kyrie prop at 27.5 points. That's about what he's averaging his last couple seasons playing against the Celtics. He has had a couple bad games his last two, so he's really driven down that points per game average that he's had against the Celtics, which was about 32 at one point before he really just took a nosedive, like I said, these last two games. But I think it's the playoffs. I think Kyrie in the playoffs is something that, last year would have been, if he was in, that was enough probably to carry the Nets to the finals with KD and an injured James Harden. Healthy Kyrie this year in the playoffs, I think his stats and numbers will take an uptick.
Yeah, I mean, the Nets, you mentioned it, their numbers in their last 10 road games are pretty impressive defensively, yet they've still given up, their games of total 235. So they've gone under in 8 of 10 of those, but it's because the totals are so high. And at 224, we feel pretty damn good about it going over. They're allowing the second most free throws in those last 10 road games. Their pace is 100. And Kyrie's due for a better offensive game than he did in that huge back and forth. So even if you say Tatum's going to come back to earth a little after 54 points, Kyrie will come up. And it's not like the Nets have anything to deal with what the Celtics do right now, which is one of the most sophisticated motion offenses in the league since the end of January. Their shot diet is just so good, the way Udoka has them playing. And like I said at the beginning, it's a little bit more fluid now without a center. I mean, they're not as good defensively, which again speaks to the over, but their ball movement is incredible. They're going to see more Derek White out there, who's more willing to drive and kick and get those shots and get the right matchups against a Nets team that just does not ever really have 5 good defenders on the floor at the same time. Oh. And they're two of their good defenders, Kyrie, even I put in there, is just, they're just going to be exhausted from the load they have to carry on the other end. So I don't think either team's going to be getting a host of stops down the stretch like you see in some playoff games. Agreed. And that's why you feel good about a high scoring fourth quarter that helps us get over here.
Yeah, I love that point that Kyrie and KD are not going to be able to pull their weight, their normal amount of weight on defense. And then you look at who's going to be out there with them, especially if it's any combination of Seth Curry, Patty Mills out there at the same time with those guys. We're talking a ton of points, a ton of height advantage all over the floor. Marcus Smart, Derek White going up against the likes of Seth Curry, Kyrie, and Patty Mills, right? You got to love the offense there. I think Boston's just playing a lot more fluid and looking for their defensive rebounds to turn into transition points as well now, and continue to attack the rim. So I love what the Celtics team's doing. I think in the series, last thing I'll say, I still think there's actually value on them in the series. I think that they're more equipped to win it right now, with their ability to actually get stops at the end. And I don't know how Brooklyn plans on stopping their opponent on defense at this point when it comes into clutch time, and they really need to grind out stops. I trust Boston to be able to score on them, and that's kind of why I prefer them in the series at -110. I still think at +4 in this game one, if you wanted to bet the line, which both of us are kind of like, I don't need to touch that. I'll just go ahead and hit. I feel really great about the over, so I'll just, that's where I'll place my units. But if you did want to hit the line, the value to me is on Brooklyn at 4 points before it is, anywhere near Boston, unless you would like that money line for them. But it is a game that I could see Brooklyn pulling out and going down 1-0. I kind of like that +550 for the Celtics to lose game one and win the series. That's why I kind of stopped when you said not just the +550, but I don't think that's sort of a crazy scenario at all. I think it's pretty plausible. So +550, and maybe I'll take a break after this video for something like that. But that is all the time we have for you guys in this one. Make sure you are liked and subscribed. As we mentioned, we're going to continue to bring you each and every playoff game here, even throughout those weekend games. So until we see you next, happy betting.